Hi, I'm Mary Pappas, owner of Alpha Delights European Bakery and Cafe in De Pere, and every year we make all kinds of seasonal breads, depending on what the season is. Christmas bread, Easter bread. For every season we have something that's very, very special. For Easter we have something that's really one of my favorites, and partly because of my Greek heritage. It's a Greek Easter bread, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. There are a number of things that I'd like to cover with this Easter bread. One is preparing the sugar for the Easter bread. Certainly it has sugar in it, and it's got an interesting assortment of some spices. There's some salt, some cardamom, and a unique spice called mallow. Now mallow is a cherry pit seed ground up, and it is unique to just a couple of islands in Greece. So it is a very ethnic seasoning for sure. So I've got all of those things mixed in here, and I'm going to mix them in with my sugar along with the zest of 2 oranges. And this is a pretty common technique that I'd encourage anybody to use whenever they need to incorporate some zest in a recipe, and that is to mix the zest with the sugar. What happens when you do that is the flavor of the zest is diffused into the sugar, and it gives you a much more even distribution of the flavor, and it also helps you get rid of the clumps that quite often occur when you are working with zest. So I'm using the sugar now as a means to transfer a lot of wonderful flavor, including that unique spice called mallow. And to get that in our Hobart mixer here, the classic mixer in the bakery, and we'll start that churning a little bit. And there's a little bit of olive oil that we're putting in here. It's just a tablespoon is all that we're using for a batch of 4 loaves of bread. I'm going to let that go a little bit so that the sugar and the seasoning gets incorporated. The ingredients I've put in so far are nicely incorporated, and I'm going to add some scalded milk. Now scalded milk is something that appears on quite a few recipes. And the trick with scalded milk is not to burn it, but what I do is I put it in the microwave, and when I see a little bit of steam coming off the top of the milk, I know it's scalded. So that's what you're going to look for. Just kind of hold it up to the light and see if there's a little bit of steam coming off. If there is, you've got scalded milk. So I'll slowly add this in to my mixture. Again, just let it get incorporated for sure. Now I've got a fair amount of egg that I'm incorporating into this batter. The start of this batter, and again we'll let that come together, and while that's doing that, I'd like to talk about really what is the secret of making this bread really work well, and that is to let the yeast get a jump start on developing the flavor of the bread. What we did is early this morning we mixed together some flour and water and yeast and made basically a sponge, something that you'd use for a sourdough bread. And what's going on here is that the flavor is developing. I mean, you smell that. You can really smell flavor, and it's also developing some structure so that this bread, which is getting more sugar and butter than breads normally like, is able to rise and become very nice to eat. So that's what we did this morning. We got this going with yeast, water, and flour, and developed a sponge. And I will start incorporating that, just pulling it apart, dropping little pieces of it in there. Now I'm going to add some flour. And again, just slowly add that in there. Try not to overwhelm. You always want to give the ingredients a chance to come together so that you don't get clumping and things are evenly distributed. Now this dough is going to look a lot different than common bread doughs. If folks are used to making breads, there'll be some things that are a little bit counterintuitive with this dough. And one of them is just how much to mix it. Certainly we want a dough that has some strength and some structure to it, but we don't want to overmix it because that will really destroy the unique texture and so on of this particular bread. Let's see how this dough is doing, whether we've got a nice window pane effect on this dough. And I suspect that we do. So again, just pulling it apart. And the farther you can stretch it without it breaking, quite often the better that is. So I'm starting to get a nice stretch on that dough. Right in there is a great example of that. We'll call it good. The last step on this bread is adding butter. Again, as I mentioned before, this dough is taking in more butter than a lot of breads really want. So again, slow is important. Just slowly pouring that in. And for a bread maker, you're going to notice that this bread is starting to act differently. It's starting to get, it starts throwing itself around more. It looks like it's separating, but slowly it will incorporate the butter. In this process that we're going to do next, that butter is going to get worked in. One of the things I'm guarding against is working this dough too much, because again, that'll make it tough. It's not sticking to my hands. And as I mentioned before, this is really enough for 4 loaves. So let me just do that and portion it out visually. Again, a kind of counterintuitive thing. Instead of working that dough anymore, I'm just squeezing it. I'm going to make a rope with this. Just going to squeeze it out. And if my eyesight is right, that's about 30 inches. You can certainly measure it if you'd like. But you can see the elasticity here of this bread. It's already, even though I haven't worked it very much, you can see how it wants to just spring back into a smaller form. So again, I'm going to just take that, cut it into 3 pieces. A little bit of a refinement of the ends. And then I'm going to be thankful that my mother taught me how to braid hair when I was a girl, and just really do that technique. Just do some simple braiding. And at the end, just tuck that in. On the top, I will just do the braiding in reverse to finish it off. We're going to let this rest for a while and raise, cover it up with a cloth, and get it to about twice the size. And then we'll put it in the oven and bake it off. After we take it out of the oven, this is what we're going to end up with, the Greek Easter bread. Now, I do want to point out that these almonds that you see on here and the shine are really added very near the end of the baking time. We'll pull it out and add those things to it. But kind of the most symbolic last step is this, adding an Easter egg to the bread.